There is a certain brand of loyalty unique to the world of video games. It's a fierce, almost tribal devotion that can be both a blessing and a curse for the companies that inspire it. And nowhere, is this phenomenon more pronounced than within the fanbase of Nintendo. For decades, this company has cultivated a following that views its products not merely as entertainment, but as cherished childhood relics, as gateways to irreplaceable memories. This deep emotional connection is powerful. It sells consoles. It moves millions of units of software. But it also fosters a strange, troubling dynamic where the consumer begins to identify more with the multi-billion-dollar corporation than with their fellow gamers. This isn't your standard brand preference, like choosing one soft drink over another. No, this is something far more ingrained. It's a belief system, one that posits Nintendo as an infallible, benevolent creator that must be protected at all costs. This mindset transforms ordinary customers into a volunteer army of corporate defenders, ready to rush to the barricades to defend Nintendo's honor, and more importantly, its bottom line. They do this even when the company's actions are demonstrably anti-consumer, even when those actions directly harm the very people who buy their products. This loyalty has become a shield for corporate overreach, a justification for practices that should be questioned, not celebrated. The problem arises when this devotion becomes blind. It's one thing to love Mario and Zelda, it's another thing entirely to believe that the corporation that owns them can do no wrong. This uncritical adulation creates an environment where any criticism of Nintendo is seen as a personal attack, and any attempt to grant consumers more control over the products they've purchased is framed as a criminal enterprise. We see this time and time again, a bizarre spectacle of consumers arguing against their own rights, championing corporate control over their own freedom. They have become the very thing they should be wary of, unpaid shills for a company that sees them as little more than a source of revenue. In this essay, we will dissect this peculiar and damaging phenomenon. We will explore how a vocal and aggressive subset of Nintendo fans has taken it upon themselves to police the gaming community, reporting modders, spreading disinformation, and cheering on corporate actions that ultimately hurt everyone. We will look at the case of the MIG Switch, a device that has become a flashpoint in the war for consumer rights, and examine how fan-led hysteria has attempted to demonize a tool that offers legitimate benefits to game owners. This is a story about misplaced loyalty and the real-world consequences it has for the future of game ownership and the health of the entire industry. Thank God for me. At the heart of this issue lies a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between a consumer and a corporation. A healthy relationship is transactional and ideally symbiotic. You give them money, they give you a product. You are not their friend, they are not your family. Nintendo, for all its whimsical characters and family-friendly branding, is a business entity driven by profit. Yet, a significant portion of its fan base seems to have forgotten this. They act as if they are stakeholders in the company's success, personally invested in its stock price and market dominance. This leads them to view fellow gamers not as peers, but as potential threats to Nintendo's financial well-being. This warped perspective manifests most clearly in the community's attitude towards modding, hacking, and emulation. These activities, which often exist to preserve games, add new features, or grant users more control over their hardware, are reflexively condemned as pure villainy. The fans who engage in this condemnation don't just disagree, they actively work to stamp it out. They become informants, scouring the internet for any sign of unsanctioned activity and reporting it directly to Nintendo, or even to law enforcement agencies. They see themselves as valiant defenders of intellectual property, noble protectors of the creators they adore, failing to see that they are simply doing unpaid labor for a company that has its own multi-million-dollar legal teams. The irony is staggering. These are gamers turning on other gamers, demanding less freedom and more restriction for everyone. They cheer when Nintendo shuts down fan projects, sues emulator developers into oblivion, or issues cease and desist orders against communities that have existed for years. They celebrate these actions as victories, as if a fan-made Pokemon game was somehow going to bankrupt a company that prints money every time it releases a new Mario title. This behavior sets a dangerous precedent, suggesting that corporations should have absolute, unquestionable authority over the products we purchase, and that any deviation from their intended use is a crime that must be punished. This choice to side with the corporation over the community is ultimately self-defeating. The very innovations that these fans rally against are often born from the modding and hacking scenes. These communities push hardware to its limits, fix bugs that developers ignore, and create new experiences that can extend the life of a console for years. By fighting against them, these corporate foot soldiers are arguing for a more sterile, more controlled, and less interesting gaming landscape. They are advocating for a world where they have fewer rights and less say over the technology they spend their hard-earned money on, all for the sake of defending a company that would not hesitate to sell them a broken product if it thought it could get away with it. Into this cauldron of corporate allegiance stepped a device known as the MIG Switch. On its surface, its function is simple and for many incredibly useful. It is a flash cart, a device that allows a user to create digital backups of their legally owned physical Nintendo Switch game cartridges and play them from a single source. For any Switch owner with a sizable collection of physical games, the appeal is obvious. It eliminates the need to constantly swap out tiny, easy-to-lose cartridges. It provides a way to preserve expensive and sometimes fragile games, protecting the initial investment. It is, in essence, a tool of convenience and preservation. Of course, any device that can copy games can also be used for piracy. This is an undeniable fact, and the creators of the MIG Switch themselves state that their product is not intended for illegal activities. However, the mere potential for piracy was enough to send the most zealous Nintendo fans into a full-blown meltdown. They immediately framed the MIG Switch not as a pro-consumer tool with legitimate use cases, but as a nefarious piracy machine designed solely to steal from poor, defenseless Nintendo. The narrative was set instantly. Anyone who supported this device was a thief, and anyone who created it was a criminal mastermind who must be brought to justice. This reaction conveniently ignores the very real problems that the MIG Switch solves for legitimate game owners. Consider the many third-party games released on Switch cartridges that don't even contain the full game, requiring a massive download to be playable. A device like the MIG Switch allows a user to consolidate the cartridge data and the downloaded update into a single, complete, and future-proof digital file. It provides a solution to a problem Nintendo itself created with its inadequate cartridge sizes and anti-consumer practices. This is not about stealing, it is about achieving a complete version of a game you already paid for. But nuance is the first casualty in a holy war. The fan-led crusade against the MIG Switch disregarded all legitimate applications. It didn't matter that it could help players manage their collections or preserve their games against loss or damage. It didn't matter that it offered a workaround for incomplete physical releases. In the black and white world of the corporate sycophant, the device was evil, plain and simple. Its existence was an affront to Nintendo, and therefore, it had to be destroyed. This simplistic, hysterical response set the stage for a campaign of reporting and disinformation that went to truly absurd lengths. The fan reaction to the MIG Switch wasn't just confined to angry forum posts or heated arguments on social media. It escalated into something far more alarming. A coordinated effort to involve federal law enforcement. In a bizarre display of misplaced civic duty, numerous Nintendo fans began tagging the official social media accounts of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, in posts denouncing the device. They weren't just complaining to Nintendo, they were attempting to trigger a federal investigation into a piece of hardware designed to back up video games. This is not normal behavior. This is a level of corporate bootlicking that borders on the pathological. Let's be perfectly clear about what was happening here. Consumers were contacting a national security and law enforcement agency to report on other consumers for wanting the ability to back up their own property. Alongside the FBI, they tagged Nintendo of America, its various international branches, and even current and former executives like Doug Bowser and Reggie Fils-Aimé. The plea was always the same: do something, these people are stealing from you. The posts often highlighted that the device's creators were allegedly Russian, adding a layer of xenophobic fear-mongering to the mix, as if that somehow made the act of backing up a Zelda cartridge a matter of international espionage. This behavior is incredibly damaging to the gaming community as a whole. It creates a chilling effect, where the mere discussion of consumer rights or hardware modification is treated as a criminal conspiracy. It fosters a culture of snitching, where gamers are encouraged to police each other on behalf of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. This is the ultimate divide and conquer strategy, and the most zealous fans are playing their part beautifully. They are so consumed with protecting Nintendo that they fail to see they are forging the chains of their own digital enslavement, demanding a world with more surveillance and less freedom. The fact that these posts received hundreds of likes and shares shows that this is not an isolated phenomenon. There is a significant and vocal contingent of the Nintendo fanbase that genuinely believes this is the correct course of action. They see themselves as righteous crusaders, when in reality they are acting as a volunteer Stasi for a video game company. They are wasting the time of public officials and normalizing the idea that consumer-empowering technology is a threat that must be met with the full force of the law. It is a pathetic and dangerous spectacle that reveals the dark side of unchecked brand loyalty. When calling in the FBI wasn't enough, the next tactic in the war against the MIG Switch was to invent pure fiction. A particularly insidious rumor began to circulate: supposedly started by a prominent Nintendo fan, claiming that the device could brick a Switch console. The made-up explanation was honestly just pure technobabble, suggesting the MIG Switch could somehow detect electrical impulses from the console's security checks and then retaliate by sending a surge to fry the system's motherboard. This claim is, from a technical standpoint, utter nonsense. It really demonstrates a profound ignorance of how either the console or the device actually works. The purpose of this lie was twofold. First, it was a scare tactic designed to frighten potential users away from the device. By spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt, these fans hoped to kill demand for the MIG Switch and protect Nintendo's walled garden. They presented this fabrication as a fact, a cautionary tale to warn off anyone daring to seek more control over their own hardware. It was a deliberate act of disinformation aimed at fellow consumers, a lie told in service of a corporation that would never thank them for it. The goal was to maintain the illusion that the Switch was an unhackable fortress, and that any attempt to breach its walls would result in swift and catastrophic punishment. Second, this fabrication served to reinforce their own worldview. It allowed them to feel smug and secure in their decision to never question Nintendo's authority. By inventing a story where the hackers get their just desserts, they could pat themselves on the back for their loyalty. See, this is what happens when you don't play by the rules. Nintendo is smarter than you. It's a comforting narrative for those who have staked their identity on a corporate brand. It paints a world of simple morality where the good guys, Nintendo and its loyal fans, always win, and the bad guys, anyone with a soldering iron and a desire for backups, are inevitably defeated. This campaign of lies is deeply harmful because it pollutes the well of public information. It makes it harder for ordinary consumers to make informed decisions about the products they own. When the discourse is flooded with fabrications and conspiracy theories, the truth just gets lost. People who could genuinely benefit from a tool like the MIG Switch, like collectors or those with large families sharing a single console, might be scared away by these baseless horror stories. The fans spreading these lies aren't protecting anyone, they're actually harming their peers by denying them access to accurate information and useful technology. The tendency of Nintendo fans to act as corporate enforcers extends beyond hardware modification. We saw a prime example of this with the release of the game Pal World. While the game was a massive success, it was also immediately met with a tidal wave of accusations from a legion of Nintendo fans who claimed it was a blatant plagiarist of Pokémon. They flooded social media, tagging Nintendo in countless posts, demanding that the company take legal action. They meticulously compared character models and game mechanics, building a case for theft and presenting it to Nintendo on a silver platter, begging the company to sue the developers of Pal World into oblivion. This fan-led outrage campaign allegedly had a real-world impact. While the full details of any legal proceedings remain private, it has been reported that Nintendo, spurred on by the public pressure, did take action. The result was that the developers of Pal World were supposedly forced to alter or remove certain game mechanics due to Nintendo's aggressive defense of its patents. Whether you believe Pal World was derivative or not, the process here is what is truly concerning. A fanbase was successfully weaponized to pressure a corporate giant into kneecapping a smaller independent competitor. They weren't just defending Nintendo, they were actively attacking another developer. This sets an incredibly dangerous precedent for the entire gaming industry. If a fanbase can be mobilized to attack any game deemed too similar to a Nintendo property, it creates a chilling effect on creativity. Game development has always been an iterative process. Developers are inspired by each other, building upon existing ideas to create new experiences. Metroid and Castlevania inspired a whole genre. Doom inspired countless first-person shooters. If Nintendo is allowed to, with the rabid support of its fans, claim ownership over broad game mechanics or creature-catching concepts, then innovation will stagnate. The fans who participated in this campaign believed they were defending the integrity of their favorite franchise. What they were actually doing was advocating for a monopoly. They were telling the world that no one else should be allowed to create a game in a similar vein, effectively handing Nintendo exclusive rights to an entire genre of game design. This is not pro-consumer, this is anti-competition. It leads to a world with fewer choices, less innovation, and more power concentrated in the hands of a few massive corporations. It's a future where any new idea that vaguely resembles a Nintendo game risks being sued out of existence, all to the roaring applause of the very customers who would benefit from more variety. To fully understand why tools like the MIG Switch are necessary, and why the fan defense of Nintendo is so misguided, one must look at Nintendo's own track record of anti-consumer practices. This is not a benevolent company being unfairly targeted. It is a corporation that has repeatedly shown contempt for its customers' desires and rights. One of its most infamous tactics is the use of artificial scarcity. By deliberately producing limited quantities of products, or making them available for a limited time, Nintendo creates a manufactured sense of urgency and panic, driving up demand and allowing scalpers to profit. The most egregious example of this was Super Mario 3D All-Stars. Here was a collection of 3 of the most beloved games of all time, released to celebrate a major anniversary, and Nintendo decided to sell it for only 6 months. There was no technical reason for this, it was a purely artificial limitation designed to force people to buy immediately for fear of missing out. This is not a consumer-friendly practice. It is a manipulative marketing gimmick that punishes anyone who couldn't afford the game in that narrow window. Fans who defend this are defending their own exploitation, celebrating a company that treats its own legacy content like a ticking time bomb. Furthermore, Nintendo has actively worked to erode the concept of physical ownership. We see this with the rise of the game key card or code in a box. Consumers go to a store, buy what looks like a physical game case, only to get home and find it contains nothing but a download code. The box is an empty shell, a piece of plastic waste. Even worse are the third-party cartridges that contain only a fraction of the game data, forcing users into a mandatory multi-gigabyte download to even play the game they supposedly bought. This makes the physical cartridge worthless on its own and ties the game permanently to Nintendo's servers, which will not exist forever. These practices create the very problems that the modding community seeks to solve. When Nintendo refuses to make its classic games permanently available, emulation becomes the only method of preservation. When Nintendo sells incomplete physical games, tools like the MIG Switch become the only way for a user to create a single, complete, and lasting backup of the product they purchased. The fans who attack these solutions are effectively defending Nintendo's right to sell them inferior products. They are fighting for a future where you don't truly own anything, where your access to the games you paid for is temporary, and entirely at the mercy of Nintendo's corporate whims. The core of this entire debate boils down to a very simple, yet increasingly contested principle: the right of ownership. When you purchase a physical object, whether it's a book, a car, or a video game console, you should have the right to use it, modify it, and repair it as you see fit. This concept, known as the right to repair and first sale doctrine, is a cornerstone of consumer rights. If you paid hundreds of dollars for a Nintendo Switch, you own that piece of plastic and silicon. It is your property. You should be able to do whatever the hell you want with it, as long as you are not infringing on copyright by, for example, distributing pirated software. Making a personal backup of a game you legally purchased is a right that has been recognized for decades in other media. You are allowed to rip a CD you own to your computer. You are allowed to make a copy of a DVD for personal use. Yet in the world of video games, this fundamental right is constantly under assault by corporations, and bizarrely by their most ardent fans. They have accepted the corporate narrative that a game cartridge is not a product you own, but a license you are merely renting. This is a dangerous and insidious shift that cedes all power to the manufacturer and leaves the consumer with nothing. Tools like the MIG Switch are an expression of this fundamental right of ownership. They empower the user to interact with their property in a meaningful way. Creating a backup is not theft. It is a prudent measure to protect an investment from loss, damage, or the inevitable decay of physical media. Consolidating a game collection onto a single device is not a crime. It is an act of convenience that makes one's property more useful. The fans who rage against these capabilities are arguing against their own freedom. They are fighting for a model where they are merely temporary custodians of the games they buy, beholden to Nintendo for permission to use them. This fight is bigger than Nintendo. It is about the future of all digital media. As more of our entertainment and tools become locked behind digital rights management and corporate-controlled ecosystems, our rights as owners are systematically stripped away. We are being pushed towards a future of perpetual rental, where we own nothing and are happy. The apathetic and worse, actively hostile attitude of these Nintendo fans towards consumer rights activists and modders only accelerates this trend. They are cheering on the very corporations that are building their digital prisons, and they are too blinded by brand loyalty to even see the bars. We are left with a deeply unsettling picture. A segment of the gaming population, so thoroughly indoctrinated by corporate marketing and nostalgia, has turned against its own. These Nintendo fans, in their quest to defend the honor of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, have become gaming's biggest snitches. They actively work to undermine consumer rights, report fellow gamers to the authorities, spread disinformation about useful tools, and lobby for anti-competitive practices that stifle creativity across the entire industry. They do all of this for free, driven by a misplaced loyalty that benefits no one but the executives at Nintendo. This behavior is not harmless. It has real consequences. It emboldens companies like Nintendo to continue with their anti-consumer practices, from artificial scarcity to the erosion of physical ownership. Why would they change when they have a built-in army of consumers ready to defend their every move and attack anyone who dares to object? This dynamic creates a toxic environment where criticism is silenced and innovation is punished. It ensures that the balance of power remains firmly in the hands of the corporation, while the rights of the individual consumer are whittled away to nothing. The fight for the right to own, modify, and preserve the games we buy is one of the most important battles in the modern consumer landscape. It's a fight against a future where our digital libraries can vanish overnight, where the games of today are unplayable tomorrow because a server was shut down. The modders, hackers, and preservationists that these fans so gleefully report are often the only ones standing in the way of that bleak future. They are the archivists, the innovators, and the true defenders of gaming history, not the corporation that would happily lock it in a vault and sell it back to you in pieces. Ultimately, the fans who engage in this corporate sycophancy are harming themselves most of all. They are passionately arguing for a world where they have fewer rights, less control, and are more beholden to the whims of a company that sees them only as walking wallets. They are celebrating the chains being forged for them and demanding that everyone else wear them too. It is a profound and tragic self-inflicted wound upon the gaming community, a testament to the corrosive power of blind brand worship. And until these fans realize they are consumers, not employees, the industry will continue to suffer for it. Thank God for me.